Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Carla, and if you do love this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. It truly makes such a difference to this channel. Now today, we'll be showing you how we put together this beautiful Shiplap accent wall. Now with that said, I'm super excited to introduce to you my amazing husband, Andy, or as everyone likes to call him, Handy Andy.
What's up, guys?
Now, he's the one that helps me execute all of my crazy home decor ideas. Now, if you're not familiar with what a shiplap accent wall is, it's pretty much an accent wall that's put together using a whole bunch of wood panels. Now, I would say that you can pretty much put this to almost any wall that you have.
So as long as you have a drywall, you're good.
Perfect, as long as you have drywall. Now, in our case, we are going to be applying the shiplap accent wall to our bathroom. So this is a very small bathroom, and this was a great way to just level up the look of our bathroom, give it a little bit more of a luxy finished look without breaking the bank. Now, in this video, we'll be showing you exactly how we put together this wall, as well as all the things that we felt really worked well, and maybe some things that we would have done differently if we were to do it again. So with that said, we are honestly huge fans of it. We absolutely love how it came out, and we're super excited to show it to you. If you have any questions, I will definitely make sure to have Handy Andy review any of your questions, especially since some of these things are a little bit more technical. He is absolutely amazing for that, and we will do everything we can to make sure we answer any of the questions that you have. With that said, let's jump into the video. Okay, so to start off, we're just going to go ahead and remove everything off this wall and make sure that we're starting with a clear surface. So since we have a mirror here, Andy is going to go ahead and remove this first. And although it's not going to be videotaped, we'll actually be removing the light that we have at the top of this wall as well, because we just like to completely change the light and possibly move it a little bit higher. And what we're left with are just these areas on the wall that are just rough, that need to be smoothed out. And then we also have this excess caulking that we'll go ahead and remove as well. Now, I did want to mention that patching the wall is optional since you're not going to see it anyways, but we really wanted to start off with a smooth surface, so we decided to patch everything up. And for this, I'm going to use a putty knife and a sander to smooth out the surface. So as you can tell, I'm just using the knife to scrape off any excess materials that are on the wall. And then for those areas of the drywall that aren't smooth, I'm just using the sponge to smooth them out as much as possible. Next, we're going to use some of this patch and paint to help patch up any of the uneven areas, any holes, just anything that really just needs that extra coverage. So all those areas of the drywall that I just sanded, I'm just going to go over that with a layer of the patch and paint, making sure that it's nice and smooth using my putty knife. And then once this is fully dry, we're going to come back and sand it one last time to make sure that our wall is perfectly smooth and fully prepped for our shiplap installation. And while this is drying, we're going to head over to Home Depot so that we can get our shiplap panels and really everything else we'll be needing for the rest of this project. And the first thing we're going to do is head over to the lumber area so that we can pick out our panels. And here we're going to be picking up our shiplap boards. Now the boards that we're using are 9/16 of an inch, and they're each 5 1/4 by 8 feet. And then we also went ahead and picked up 1x2 PVC trimmings, and we'll be needing 2 of them so that we have 1 for each side of the wall. And I'll definitely make sure to list the supplies down in the description of this video. All right, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Next, we're gonna head over to the paint aisle so that we can pick up all the rest of our supplies. And here I'm going to pick up 3 bottles of liquid nails, which is one of the items we're going to be using to actually stick our panels onto our accent wall. And then I'm also going to be using the Dynaflex 230 in the color white. Now this is a caulking, and I'll be showing you what we'll be using this for later as well. And we have everything else we'll be needing at home, so it's time to head over. Alright guys, so this is our wall, and it has been patched, sanded, and it's ready for us to begin installing our shiplap. Now, if you are applying shiplap to a bathroom like us, keep in mind where your plumbing is located so that when you begin nailing your shiplap onto the wall, you can make sure that you do not nail into the wall through any plumbing. That's super important. Now down here to the left is where we're actually going to be placing our vanity once our wall is complete. And as you can see up there, there are actually 2 holes for our lighting, and that's because we actually relocated our lighting higher up to open up the space even more. So later in this video, we'll also show you the proper way to go ahead and cover that original hole that we will no longer be using. Now to get started with our wall, we're going to get started at the very bottom using this baseboard. Now there's 2 ways that you can start your wall. You can get started with a baseboard like this, or you can go ahead and start your wall with a shiplap panel. Now we already have baseboards going around our entire home, as well as this entire room. So we're gonna go with the baseboard to keep it nice and consistent and cohesive. So we are starting off our wall with this baseboard right here, and what we did is we just made a small little hole right here so that it can fit right into the plumbing. So we are just going to put liquid nails along the back of this board, and then we're going to slide it right into the plumbing and press it against the wall. Once it's placed, then we're going to make sure it's nice and straight using our leveler. As you can see, it's perfectly aligned with the tub there, and then here at the end is where we stopped it, because of course we're putting our cute little vanity. Next, we're gonna add a trimming on each side of the wall, and we grabbed a small piece of shiplap as well as the trimming just to make sure it's nice and flush together, and I think this is as close as we're gonna get it. So this is the trimming we'll be using. So before we cut our trimming and add it to the wall, we're gonna measure the height of the left side and the right side of the wall so that we can cut them accordingly. So we'll be using a compound miter saw to cut the border, and this saw has a 10-inch blade. Before we nail the border down, we're using our leveler again to make sure it's squared off. So Andy's going to utilize this leveler as we start to nail the border as well, making sure that each piece of the border is fully leveled after each nail. And to nail the borders in place, we're using a nail gun with an air compressor. And for this, we're using 16 gauge brand nails that are 2 inches long. And as you can tell, we were able to nail this one perfectly nice and straight. So we're gonna go ahead and follow the same process for the left side of the trimming. And a quick little important tip about nailing is that it is super important that when you're nailing that you are nailing into the studs of the wall. So before we begin adding any of our shiplap to our wall, we are going to use the stud finder to make sure that we know exactly where our studs are. So every single time we nail, we can make sure to hit those studs every single time so our shiplap panels are nice and secure on the wall. And as you can see, Andy is just marking them as he locates them. Now that our borders are in place, we are just going to measure the space between the 2 borders because we're going to cut our shiplap panels to fit that exact size. You want these measurements to be as exact as possible so everything looks super nice and flushed. So as Handy Andy always reminds me, measure twice so you only have to cut once. And then from here, we are also measuring the height of each panel as well as the height from the wall so that we can figure out exactly how many panels we'll be needing from bottom to top. Once you figure out exactly how many panels you'll be needing, then you'll have to figure out whether or not you'll need to cut any of those panels in half so that all of the panels can fit perfectly against the wall. And now it's time to cut our shiplap. So we are going back in with our miter saw, and we're using a measuring tape to make sure that we have our measurements right. And then we're just going to slice this. Now, just a quick reminder that you can also use a circular saw for this, but a miter saw is probably the easiest thing to use just because it is flat and it's just going to give you the ability to create clean and crisp cuts. So we definitely recommend using one of these if you have one on hand. Now, in our case, we are unable to fit full panels from top to bottom, so we're going to partially cut one of our panels so that they all fit perfectly together. Now, if this happens to you as well, we recommend placing that panel on the bottom of your wall, since that panel is going to be a lot slimmer, just so that it's as least visible as possible. And then from there, you can continue on with all the regular size shiplap panels to finish the rest of the wall. And now that we have our pieces cut, we're going to begin adding each piece onto the wall one by one. So we are starting off with the bottom, and then we're going to work our way up. And as you can see here, we are starting this wall off with that shorter panel, and we've already went ahead and added it above our baseboard using liquid nails for this single piece. And we are once again grabbing our leveler to make sure that it is perfectly straight. And once it's good to go, we are going to finish it off with some brand nails, and then we can begin adding the rest of our shiplap. And to add the shiplap to the wall, what we're going to do is cover the backside with liquid nails. And once that is pretty well covered, at that point, we are just going to fit it onto the wall, making sure that it is attached to the panel previously placed. And of course, make sure to apply some pressure in the middle of the panel from left to right. And then we're going to go right back in with our brand nails, making sure that we are hitting each and every one of those studs as we are placing these nails into the wall. And this is just going to ensure that each of the panels is tightly secure against the wall. And as we nail, we're making sure to go ahead and nail on that top lip of each panel, since that area will be covered as we continue to add more panels above it. Now, if you notice, there are some areas that we did go ahead and nail in the center of the panel, and that's just because we knew that the vanity was going to cover it. So make sure that if it's going to be exposed, that you are making sure that you're always nailing on that upper lip versus nailing right in the middle of the panel. As you can see here, Andy's kind of running his finger along the wall and checking for any areas that may not be as flat or as secure. And then he's just adding a nail in those areas to make sure that it is nice and secure and that the entire panel is flush with all the rest before we can move forward to the next.
Now, after cutting each panel, I highly recommend dry fitting each one to the wall to make sure that the size is just right and you don't have big gaps on the sides. To help you make sure you always get the right size, it's also helpful to measure the width of the wall often before cutting each panel, just in case the measurements vary a little bit in certain areas.
Nice. Looks super good. So as you can tell here, there's a very minimal difference between each of these two panels, which is perfectly fine because this right here, we're going to go ahead and caulk in the end anyways. Overall, the more precise you make your measurements, the less of a gap you'll have on the ends of each piece of shiplap. And before you head on to the next panel, it's also a really good idea to level out each panel just to make sure that it is nice and straight before you add the next piece. Okay, so we've completed a little over half of our wall, and now we are reaching an area where we previously had a light.
So what we're going to do is, I'm going to make a square hole in this paneling, and then I'm going to just put it back in there, and then once where the hole is coming out, I'm just going to put a faceplate to cover it. And you're not going to see it because our mirror is big enough to cover this whole side since the vanity is coming over here.
Now this is in our case where we previously had lighting and we don't want to cover it, but if you don't have that situation, then you're just going to continue to go all the way up. So now Andy has just placed a shiplap panel on top of the hole so that we can actually use it as a guide. So he created a line to get an idea of where that specific panel would end. So we know exactly where on the panel we need to cut that box and the exact size we need to cut that box so that it fits perfectly with the cap that we'll be putting to cover it with. And from there, we're going to use those measurements so that we can go ahead and draw our box. And then from there, we're going to use our jigsaw to just make our first line. And then we're going to use a drill to actually poke 4 holes for each of the corners. And that's actually going to help us cut out the rest of our box using the jigsaw. Now this cut doesn't have to be absolutely perfect as long as we're able to fit that cap once we place this panel onto the wall. And then later on, we're actually going to cover this with a mirror anyways. So you won't be able to see it, but it's super important to put that cap since there is electricity behind it. And the first thing we're going to do when applying this panel is just dry fit it to make sure that our hole is perfect. And let's take a look here. And it looks perfect. So that's exactly what we want. So from here, we're going to add it to the wall using the same method that we did for all the rest of the panels, which is to liquid nail the back. And then we'll go ahead and jump in with the brand nails on the upper lip of the panel as well, just like all the rest of the panels. And now we are just working our way up to one of the following pieces. And this piece in specific does run into our new lighting. So we are basically following the same method, which is just cutting our shiplaps to fit around this electricity box. And then we're going to do the same exact thing for the next panel of shiplap, which is basically finishing the rest of the box. And now we are adding our last and final piece of shiplap. And as you can tell, we cut it to fit perfectly in this area, which is why it fits so seamlessly. Now, one thing I do want to know is if you can tell, the actual panel itself is not the full panel. We did end up having to cut it, and that's simply because we didn't do our measurements right on the bottom half. So once again, just want to reiterate that it's super important to make sure that you do your measurements multiple times and that you can really figure out how many panels you're going to need from the bottom to the top, so that hopefully if you do have to cut a panel, you can make sure to have that one on the very bottom so it looks really seamless and it is not noticeable that you had to cut the panel. Okay, so now that our wall is done, we are going to begin caulking these holes. These are the holes that we made when we were nailing our trimmings to the wall. Now to do this, we're going to use some of that Dynaflex 230 that we picked up at Home Depot, which is a white caulking, and it's super important that you get one that is paintable. So as you can tell, this one says 2-hour paint ready, which is exactly what you want. And then we're going to use the caulking gun to snip the nozzle at an angle. We definitely recommend making a small hole to start, since the area we're going to be working with has small joints and it's just a small area overall. And here we have our slanted edge, which is perfect. And then now we're just going to poke a hole inside using this. We will clean our gun, and then we will load it up, and we are ready to go.
So first one I'll do is probably here.
So from here, we're just going to use this caulking to make our way down through the areas that we want to cover. So first we're going to apply it in between the tile and the trimming, just to make sure this area looks really nice and seamless. And then you're just going to use your finger to go ahead and smooth that entire area out. And you're going to do this by just applying a little bit of that caulking onto your finger. And that's just going to further help you make it nice and smooth.
And then with the excess, you can actually use this to fill up the little holes you have here.
Perfect.
Okay.
Raven, what are you doing here, little lady? And once you've ran your finger down the caulking, then you're also going to grab a sponge with some water, and you're also going to slide that down the areas of the caulking, making sure that the caulking is only in those areas that you want it to be, and that the rest of the areas are nice and clean and everything looks nice and seamless and smoothed out. And what it results in is a nice clean finish. Yeah. And then we're just going to go ahead and dry the area off with a towel, and we are all set. Okay, so now we are going to be also filling this line right over here. Now, if you're going for more of a farmhouse look, you can go ahead and just leave it as is. But at least for us, we are looking for more of a clean look here, so we're going to go ahead and fill it in. And we're going to use the same material that we used to fill in this side right here.
Caulking.
Caulking! And to fill it in, we're going to be using a little bit more of that caulking, like Andy just said. And we're just going to be applying it with our finger into that very thin area. You can, of course, grab the caulking gun as well and then smooth it out with your finger. Really, whichever is easiest for you is what I would recommend. Now remember that filling in these little areas with caulking is not absolutely required. Now this is mainly because we wanted a little bit more of a finished and seamless look overall. But if you want to give it a little bit more of that rustic look, you can of course skip this step. Now while you're doing this, you might get a little bit of extra caulking stuck in between some of the shiplap panels. So I just grabbed a flathead and just used that to go ahead and remove any excess caulking that was stuck in between. And then we're going to go ahead and follow the same process on the left side of the wall as well, so that everything looks nice and clean and perfectly even. And then from here, we're going to grab some of this plastic wood filler, and we're just going to use this to fill in any holes that are still there. So for example, any areas that were not filled with any caulking, or any areas that already have caulking but still show as a hole. This will even everything out nicely, so you can't even tell that there was ever a hole. So now we're going to give this some time to dry so that we can sand all the holes we just patched and leave us with a nice and smooth surface before we get to painting. Alright guys, so it's the next day and we've already let all of our wood filler dry. So I did want to mention that if you do happen to have any pencil marks on your shiplap from maybe measuring or something like that, you can always remove it super easily with a magic eraser. And once your pencil marks are gone, it's time to get to sanding. And we're going to go ahead and sand all these areas that we filled in with the wood filler. Now this wood filler truly doesn't take too long to dry. It only takes about 2 to 6 hours for small holes like these. But we just decided to wait overnight so that we could go ahead and paint right after we're done sanding. So I'll be using this sander block right here, and we're just going to sand it like you would anything else. And I'm just going to rub it back and forth until the surface is nice and smooth. You'll do that to all the holes that we patched up, and then we're ready for painting. And for the finishing touches, I'm just going to paint this area. So the first thing I'm going to do is just tape down the edges to make sure that I don't get any paint on the tile in the bathroom or any paint on the other walls. So now that that's all done, it's time to set up our paint. And from here, I'm going to be using the Bare Paint and Primer in 1 and the standard white that the gallon comes in. I'm going to give that a good mix and grab a nice Trilon brush. And in addition to the paintbrush, I'm also going to use one of these rollers so that we can roll the paint on all the other sides. We'll be using the brush for the corners and then the roller for everything else. Now, although I didn't do this, it's always a good idea to start with the edges using the brush and then finish everything else with the roller. Of course, it's not going to mess up your painting if you don't start with the edges, but it definitely is a good practice when it comes to painting. And when you're painting, you're going to want to make sure that you do a nice thin layer and just making sure that you're not getting any chunks of paint stuck in between the panels. We want to, of course, paint it, but we don't want any chunks stuck in there. So I would definitely recommend keeping it nice and thin. With that said, I did make sure to give it 2 full coats in order to make sure it was perfectly covered. And one thing that I did do in my case is I did paint over the electrical box simply because it was going to be covered and I wanted it to look nice and cohesive with the wall. And there we have it, our wall is complete and fully painted. And after we removed the tape and finished remodeling the bathroom, this is what our bathroom looked like. As you can tell, the Shiplap wall made such a difference to this room. It is a total game changer and we did it for such a great price. If you'd like to see more on this bathroom, make sure to listen in the comments down below. We'd love to share more with you guys or even make a video of the whole transformation. We are just so happy with how this came out. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We truly hope this video has been super helpful to you. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to comment down below if you have any questions at all. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up. And with that said, we will see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye guys.